In the fall of 1857, something took place in Little Rock, Arkansas that local authorities buried so thoroughly it would take more than 100 years for the first rumors to creep out. On Thanksgiving night, inside what had once been the finest plantation mansion in Pulaski County, a slave called Samson allegedly snapped his master's neck with his bare hands, breaking Colonel Jeremiah Ruddle's spine like a brittle branch. Yet what sets this tale apart from countless other stories of slave revolt is this: witnesses swore Samson's strength that night was beyond human. Strong enough to crush a skull in one grip, twist iron tools into knots, and leave handprints sunk so deeply into solid oak beams that they can still be seen to this day. Official records were locked away, witnesses were hushed, and every trace of the event was scrubbed from the newspapers. What truly happened at Thanksgiving on Rutledge Plantation? And why did 3 different county officials spend the remainder of their lives insisting that what they witnessed defied every natural law? Before we dive deeper into the story of Samson and the secrets hidden beneath Rutledge Plantation, if these lost pieces of American history fascinate you, smash that subscribe button and tell us in the comments which state you're watching from, because tonight's story might be closer to your own backyard than you realize. The tale begins in the heart of Arkansas Territory, 20 miles south of Little Rock, where the Arkansas River wound lazily through the richest cotton bottomland in the entire South. By 1857, Rutledge Plantation had swelled to more than 3,000 acres, worked by almost 200 enslaved men, women, and children who lived beneath the shadow of Colonel Jeremiah Ruddle's towering Greek Revival mansion. Rutledge was a study in contradiction, a Massachusetts-born attorney who had come south in his 20s, lured by the promise of quick fortune in cotton. Unlike most planters who inherited the system, Rutledge had chosen it. And perhaps because it was a choice, he governed his land with a cold, methodical cruelty that appalled even his fellow slaveholders. He kept precise logs of every whipping, maintained meticulous breeding records of his human property, and was known across Pulaski County for treating slave management as a science. Life for the enslaved at Rutledge fell into 2 worlds: the field hands in rough-hewn cabins down by the river, and the house servants in marginally better quarters nearer the great house. It was a world of hushed voices, secret knowledge, and survival wisdom handed down through generations. The older slaves still spoke wistfully of the gentler master who had owned the land before Rutledge arrived with his northern money and southern hunger. Among all these souls, one man stood apart, not merely for his height, though at 6'4" he loomed over nearly every man of that era, but for his strange past. Rutledge had bought him 3 years earlier from a failing Louisiana plantation. The bill of sale carried an unusual warning: strong constitution, extraordinary physical capabilities, possible medical anomaly. Buyer accepts all risk. The seller, a Frenchman named Boudreau, had been almost desperate to be rid of him, despite Samson's clear value in the fields. Samson never spoke of his life before. Yet the other slaves noticed things. He could labor 16 hours in the broiling cotton rows without tiring. He could hoist bales that normally took 2 men. When examined up close, the calluses on his palms looked more like horn than skin. Jupiter, the enslaved blacksmith, swore Samson could bend horseshoes barehanded, though he was careful never to show that gift where white eyes might see. But it wasn't only raw power that marked him. There was a sharp, guarded intelligence in his gaze and a hidden literacy no slave was ever meant to have. Some nights, people claimed they saw him tracing symbols in the dirt outside his cabin, symbols that were not English letters, but something closer to mathematical equations. Colonel Rutledge developed a special interest in Samson, though never from kindness. A subscriber to phrenology journals and the latest agricultural science, the colonel saw in Samson both prophet and proof of his theories. He began private strength assessments in the old carriage house, far from curious eyes, timing how long Samson could work, measuring output, filling leather-bound journals with calculations. He made the man lift anvils, tree trunks, sections of machinery, pushing him hours past the point any ordinary man would drop. By the fall of 1857 those sessions had grown darker. Rutledge started inviting wealthy neighbors to watch what he proudly called his demonstrations, contests of lifting, bending, breaking, turning Samson into a living exhibit of impossible strength. But as Thanksgiving drew near, the other slaves noticed a shift in Samson's manner, a new tension in his shoulders, a distant calculation in his eyes, as though he were solving a problem only he could see. Jupiter later told investigators that Samson had begun asking quiet, precise questions about the layout of the mansion, about the colonel's nightly habits, about which house servants had keys to which doors. The household was preparing for Colonel Ruttle's grandest Thanksgiving yet, over 40 guests traveling from as far as Memphis and New Orleans, many coming specifically to witness the marvelous specimen. Delicacies had been ordered from Baltimore, the menu planned for weeks. And most important of all, Rutledge had promised an after-dinner show with Samson that would astonish everyone and cement his reputation as Arkansas's most enlightened planter. What Rutledge did not know was that Samson had been listening. House servants, moving unseen through the mansion, had overheard talk of the planned demonstration. Worse, some had glimpsed pages of the colonel's private journals left open on his desk, entries speaking of terminal experiments, ultimate thresholds, and acceptable losses in the name of science. Thanksgiving Day 1857 broke clear and crisp over the Arkansas lowlands. Both master and slave made their final preparations, neither aware that before the night ended one would lie dead and the other would disappear into the wilderness, leaving behind a mystery that would haunt Pulaski County for generations. November 26th began like any other Thanksgiving on the plantation, yet for those who knew how to read the signs, tension hung thick in the air. By first light the kitchens roared with activity as enslaved cooks prepared a feast for 50 under the sharp eye of head cook Molly Chittenden. Samson had been assigned to ready the grounds, setting extra tables on the wide veranda, filling and placing oil lamps for the evening spectacle. But those laboring beside him noticed an uncharacteristic restraint in his movements, as if every ounce of effort were now measured and saved for a single purpose. Colonel Rutledge spent the morning locked in his study, reviewing notes for what he had privately named the Grand Demonstration. A journal entry from that very morning, later found when the mansion was torn down, read in his neat hand, "Today I shall drive the specimen past every known limit. Science requires nothing less than total understanding." Guests began arriving near noon, carriages lining the long Oak Avenue. Among them were Judge Cornelius Dillingham of Little Rock, planter Samuel Vaughn from Helena, Memphis physician Dr. Nathaniel Peton, and most notably Professor Emanuel Voss, a German specialist in physical anthropology, who had come all the way from St. Louis just to see Ruttle's prize. The afternoon passed in drinks and conversation on the veranda while Samson continued his tasks with mechanical calm. Around 3 o'clock, when Jupiter tried to speak with him, Samson's eyes looked straight through the blacksmith as though his thoughts were miles away. Dinner unfolded without incident: roast turkey, sugar-cured ham, cornbread dressing, seasonal vegetables, all served by hands that glided silently between kitchen and dining room. Talk flowed with the wine: cotton prices, territorial politics, the growing storm between North and South. Then, as dessert plates were cleared, Colonel Rutledge rose, face flushed with wine and triumph. "Gentlemen," he declared, "this evening you will witness something that shatters every belief about the boundaries of human strength. My specimen, Samson, will perform feats impossible only a generation ago." Torches already ringed the old carriage house, throwing wild shadows on the weathered walls. Inside, the floor had been cleared save for iron bars, oak beams, and heavy sections of railroad iron. Samson waited in the flickering light, his huge silhouette perfectly still, yet something in the set of his shoulders spoke of coiled readiness rather than submission. The early demonstrations went as always: weights no man should lift, iron bent like licorice, oak split by bare hands. Professor Voss scribbled furiously in German. But as the night wore on, Ruttle's commands grew more savage. Guests began shifting uncomfortably, realizing they were watching torture dressed as science. Judge Dillingham was the first to speak. Around 10:30, As Rutledge ordered Sampson to attempt a section of railroad rail, the judge murmured, "Colonel, perhaps we have seen sufficient for one evening." Rutledge waved him off, drunk on attention. "Nonsense. We are only now reaching the truly fascinating thresholds. Sampson, something new tonight." He pointed to the massive 400-pound flywheel from a cotton gin that had been hauled in that morning. Sampson stared at the flywheel, then at Rutledge, then slowly around the circle of faces. When he spoke, his voice was so low several men leaned forward. "No, sir." The word struck the room like a gunshot. In the antebellum South, a slave's flat refusal of a direct order was unthinkable, punishable only by immediate, savage retaliation. Yet something in Sampson's calm stopped every hand from reaching for a whip. Rutledge's face cycled through shock, rage, and icy fury. "What did you say?" "I said no, sir. You will obey, or you will learn what real pain feels like." For an endless moment the two men stared across the torchlight. Then Sampson smiled, a smile witnesses later described as the most frightening thing they had ever seen. "No, sir," he repeated softly. "I don't believe I will." What followed was so swift most could barely follow it. In 3 strides Sampson crossed the floor. Rutledge had time only to raise his arms before the crack, described as a thick green branch snapping in a storm, echoed through the carriage house. Colonel Jeremiah Rutledge dropped dead, neck broken with no more effort than snapping kindling. Sampson stood over the body a moment, hands still curved as if holding something fragile that had simply come apart. Then he looked up at the ring of horrified white faces and spoke in perfect, educated English with an accent none could place. "Gentlemen, I recommend you leave. Now." The stampede that followed was undignified in the extreme. Arkansas's finest citizens fought one another to reach their carriages and flee into the night. Within minutes the plantation lay silent except for the slaves in their quarters, the colonel's corpse, and Sampson, and the flickering torches. By dawn, both body and killer had vanished. The carriage house stood empty, torches burned to stubs, only those impossible handprints remaining in the oak beams. What happened in the hours after remains one of the night's enduring riddles. When house slaves finally crept out at sunrise, they found no trace of Sampson, no trace of the colonel, only scattered iron and the lingering smell of smoke. Word spread like wildfire through the planter network. Judge Dillingham returned to Little Rock in a state his clerk called complete nervous collapse. Dr. Peton committed himself to a sanitarium and refused to speak of that night for over a year. Professor Voss abandoned his hotel room, leaving a trunk of notes written in a mix of German and undecipherable symbols. Sheriff Thomas Brieg arrived with armed deputies expecting a slave revolt. Instead he found eerie stillness. The enslaved, when questioned, gave answers so uniform they were useless. Yes, they had heard shouting. No, they had not looked. Lights moving late at night? Perhaps, but from the quarters it was impossible to tell. Jupiter, pressed hardest, finally admitted Sampson's strength had been unnatural, like he was powered by something else entirely. He spoke of seeing Sampson late at night tracing strange figures in the dirt, speaking in a language that sounded like someone long accustomed to giving orders. Physical evidence was just as baffling: no blood, no footprints in the soft earth, no body. Search parties scoured 20 miles in every direction. Nothing. A $500 reward, the equivalent of a small fortune, went up within days. Wanted posters spread across the territory: large Negro male, approximates 6 feet 4 inches, unusually powerful build, answers to Sampson, extremely dangerous. Yet as weeks became months, stranger reports trickled in: bounty hunters finding campsites where trees had been uprooted by bare hands, glimpses of a giant figure moving soundlessly through the forest at night, whispers among slaves of the strong man who was coming. By early 1858 the case had become an embarrassment. Northern papers began calling Samson the Arkansas Superman. Governor Conway, fearing damage to the state's reputation and rising sectional tension, ordered every official record sealed. The reward quietly vanished. But then, when Ruttle's estate was settled, executors found a false bottom desk drawer containing correspondence with northern universities, receipts for mysterious chemicals, and a contract with something called Meridian Research Associates of Boston, signed by both Colonel Rutledge and, in handwriting house slaves swore was Samson's, subject S. The documents vanished into federal custody. Witnesses were sold away. Mention of Meridian Research was erased. Still, the rumors spread through slave quarters like wildfire, tales of a strong man who broke his chains and walked into legend, of secret northern experiments, of others like him waiting for their turn. Then, in spring 1858, the Pinkerton Detective Agency, hired by persons unknown, began tracing Samson's path backward. What they uncovered was a decade-long chain of human enhancement experiments stretching from Louisiana bayous to Boston laboratories, funded by Northern capital and Southern ambition, all designed to create the perfect laborer, or the perfect soldier. And at the center of it all stood Samson, not an accident, but the most successful product of a program that had accidentally created something far more dangerous than a stronger slave, a free man with the mind and body to end the system that made him. From there the story only grows darker. Coordinated escapes of other enhanced subjects, destroyed research facilities, messages carved deep into laboratory walls, and finally a secret compact that sent the survivors to a new life in distant Alaska, while officially, the entire affair was buried so deep most Americans would never know it happened at all. Those handprints in the oak beams of the ruined carriage house. They say they're still there, deeper and clearer with every passing year, as if the wood itself refuses to forget. So what do you think? Was everything truly revealed, or are there still classified folders in Washington that no one is allowed to open? Drop your thoughts below. Did Samson and his kind really vanish into the Alaskan wilderness, or are their descendants still out there, watching, waiting, and remembering? If this hidden slice of history gave you chills, share it with someone who loves dark truth, smash that like button, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and we'll see you in the next one, because the past is never as dead as they want us to believe.